Welcome back everybody to a quick update about my Blood Angels army building. It's been a while, unfortunately I've been a little bit busy at work, and also the nice Jump Infantry pieces that I have here have nearly taken the better of me because I just wasn't able to get them the way I liked them at the beginning, so I was a little bit frustrated with myself, but after trying out some stuff and playing around with them a little bit more, I think now they are at a level that is acceptable and that can be shown. So let's look at some of the models in a little bit more detail and see what's what. Well, let's start with the annoying buggers. The Jump Infantry. At the moment, I think I'm now quite happy with the paint job on them, but while I was building them I just had the problem that for whatever unfortunate reason I built them up too much. So when I tried to start painting them with the paintbrush, I just wasn't able to get a decent finish as I would have liked it on the models, so they never looked really right. For example, I unfortunately directly glued the helmet to the pieces, so when trying to get a nice even finish on their helmets, it just didn't work for me. I didn't have the control in the paintbrush enough to really get it nicely looking, and without the jump backs on there while building, it also looked very flat and strange. Now that I added the jump backs to the models, I think they come out a lot better, they stand out better, and it just looks more complete. Second slight problem, the power weapons. Here I tried to go with a bluish paint job, but against the red of the model, the blue just doesn't really stand out enough for me. So there I probably should have gone with a slightly different color, but I say it's acceptable. Let's call it tabletop standard and then it should be fine. For the basing this time around, I also went with the grayish gravel stuff, which is a not too bad contrast to the red bodies of the models. But I think I even could have continued going with the sandy type of surface, because the brown probably would have made the red stand out a little bit better even. Another problem where I encountered that I just couldn't cut the masking tape fine enough was for the chainswords, where I wanted to do the warning stripe design, but as soon as I realized that I couldn't get the tape clean enough so that it looked uniform, I had to go for a different plan. So I went with a mainly black body and just some gray highlights on the chainswords themselves to try and give it a little bit of more detail. However, it's not exactly like I planned them to be, but I think they came out in the end quite nicely and that it's absolutely acceptable for my standards. Shoulder pads. Luckily I had some left over from my Dev Company guys, so I could add them here to the mix so that they just looked a little bit more interesting and not as uniform and just with some decals on them. So yeah, I think now at the moment I'm quite happy with my Jump Infantry. It could be of course better, but for the first time building them, I think the end result is acceptable and a good basis to continue onwards for the future. My two Landspeeders that I built. Here I have to say with the final build I'm quite happy. Although in the beginning I was struggling quite a lot with understanding the instruction manual by GW. I just, for some of the pictures, didn't get what they exactly wanted me to build, but luckily I was dry fitting the models enough so that I always could check if it would fit in the end, and so figure out what GW actually meant with their instructions. So it was a little bit like a puzzle game, but I have to say I found it actually quite nice once I understood to really double check everything with dry fitting so that no problems would crop up during the build when I glued it itself then in the end. Here on the side of this Landspeeder there's a slight error that I made. Unfortunately I tilted the Landspeeder while the glue was still a little bit wet on the cymbal, and that unfortunately slightly moved the cymbal, but I will have to live with it because I find no good way of just removing this one piece of the model. From the painting as well, I think it went quite nicely to paint. Of course there are a lot of larger surfaces than on standard infantry models, so that always helps in the beginning. I tried to do a little bit of pre-shading, particularly here on top, and I have to say I think I was too careful because not a lot of it remained after I applied 2 coats of the paint, of the red paint. So here I should have gone a little bit stronger with the black, just to give a little bit more contrast. When trying to correct for this with the washes, on the other hand, I got a little bit over happy with applying it. So there's some black pools that shouldn't be as strong as they are, but I just say it looks a little bit dirty and untidy, but let's call it use or wear marks on the model, and then I can live with it. Where I was a little bit surprised and quite happy was in the way the contrast in the end turned out between the underside of the Landspeeders and the attached or underslung weapons. Both are using gray, but on the model you see quite a decent contrast between the bodywork and the weapon, so it's looking nicely and not too flat. The marker lights here in yellow, there I'm not so happy with the yellow I used. I probably needed something a little bit stronger just to make it stand out more. And a further problem that I encountered, but that's more one of not being used to, is I tried to use pigments to get some usage effects on the flamers so that the gold wouldn't stand out as much that I used. But unfortunately I think I just used the wrong mix of water and pigments, because it was a very thick one and didn't really probably stick to the model. So in the end I wiped it off again and just did the washing thing to keep it not as fresh looking, but give it a slightly used feel to it. And here I have to say, I think with pigments I have to do quite a lot of testing for the future to see how I could use them, so I think they add something to the model instead of just being a distraction. Another small point that I saw after assembling the models, and unfortunately there I didn't dry fit it so I couldn't correct it anymore properly, is with the small earthquake, was with the drivers here, because I also painted the inside of their cockpits red. I think the pilot and co-pilot don't stand out as much as I would have liked it. So here I think I could have improved the model if I would have given the inside of the cabin a different color. It could have been either gray or something like black, just so that the red driver would stand out a little bit more. But I would have said for the first time building the model, I'm quite happy with them. They look nice. Again, it's surely only tabletop standard, but I think it works for this. And as a new experience of building a different model that I haven't built before, it was also quite nice to try and figure out what I wanted to do with it, where I could place some decals just to break up the panels a little bit, and a little bit also the question which colors to use as to not have everything just red. So yeah, here my two Landspeeders, and I think I'm quite a fan of them. And last but definitely not least, as the huge Dreadnought fan that I am, I had to do another Furioso just to see, in comparison to my old one, how did I improve, how does it look like, what can I do to the model. This time around I think the Furioso building went, again of course, easily, because I built so many of them that I nearly can do them completely without instructions, without making any building errors. Also again, as a bigger model, of course it's always easier to paint decently and to get a nice finish on it. The use of the airbrush this time around also gave a much cleaner look on the large red panels than when the last time I did it with my brush. Also, on a positive note here for me, I didn't overdo it with the wash on this model, so there is a little bit of washing on it, just to give it a little bit more contrast, but it's not overdone like on the Landspeeders. But yeah, I think it worked quite well. What I did try on this model, which wasn't entirely successful, but it's also not a huge problem for me, here was with the blood talons. Instead of going with a bluish color job, this time I tried to go with a green one. In terms of standing out against the rest of the body, I think it works very well. You have a nice contrast between the red and the green. The color blending itself wasn't as strong as I hoped it to be. I just didn't use enough white for the last go over the talons, so that the tips look a little bit too dark for my liking, but I think this is one of the steps where I could improve, but it's not critical. The rest of the model worked quite nicely. Here's a little bit of overpaint, but that's okay. The panels, I think here of course I have a little bit of overspray from the paint airbrush, because I didn't thin the colors properly, so it spluttered out a little bit, but it's not too bad. I can always say it's wear on the model. The only thing that I have to say where I'm still struggling a lot, but that's probably more a problem of me myself, trying to fill in a name in all these cartouches, because my handwriting anyway is awful, and then trying to fit it into such a small space and make it look nice, that's just something that I think that will be beyond me for the rest of time. As a small change up from all my other builds, also on that model I went with a brownish color for the base, and I have to say I think it worked surprisingly well. I didn't expect it to look as good as it did, but the contrast between the brown and the red works quite well for me. So here I'm quite happy that I tried it out, and it really does it for me. So far for my Blood Angels, and now a quick sneak peek of what I will be up to during the next weeks. Yesterday my Necron and Orc starter boxes finally arrived from Wayland. So after many weeks of waiting, I finally am able to try out some different armies to paint and see how they feel to me. While I still will remain true to the Blood Angels, I think a little bit of diversity and the possibility to play around with different color combinations should help me in the long run to get a better feel for painting and also for color combinations. When the models arrived yesterday, I started building the orc bikes. A little bit like the Landspeeders, the GW instruction manual was a little bit, let's say, challenging sometimes to read of what they really wanted me to do. But after I got a hang of what the bikes should look like, they build up quite nicely. Funnily, what I didn't expect, the biggest challenge in the end for me was how to glue the drivers in place. For I personally think that the position that they should be sitting in is a little bit awkward for the bikes. I would have expected them to lean back a lot more, but just to make the handles match up, you have to push them quite up front to the steering handle wheel of the bike, and that made it a little bit strange looking for me. And also, funnily, I think it quite reduced the glue points of the models down to a comparatively small area, which I didn't expect. But I think in the end, after fiddling around with the parts a little bit, it's now fitting quite decently, and the glue bonds should be strong enough to hold it together properly. I also already base coated it, and I hope I can start work on them either today or at least tomorrow, so that I can start painting them. It should be fun and a good job. After getting the bikes done, I will of course do the 20 boys that have been delivered, which should be a good exercise in setting up a production line of how to efficiently paint the models. But yeah, I am really looking forward to it. Not because I dislike the Blood Angels, but more because I really also like the Orcs. Necrons, I still have to wait until I can get some different colored rods, because I hope to do a slightly different paint job than the standard only gray and green ones. I hope to go into a little bit of a bluish direction with some white panels on the troops, but before I promise too much, I will have to try out what I'm actually able to do. So thanks for watching. If you have any comments or suggestions, please post them, and happy wargaming.